I look at Michael Bennet as a longtime incumbent. He seems well liked. I watched the debate. I mean, it was like these two guys trying to figure out how to contrast with each other was hilarious. It was like two guys at the same fraternity trying to tell, their dates that they weren't, the same dudes. I mean, I do think like, wow, 25% chance that Michael Bennet gets through the primary seems a little bit understated off of what, like one poll and some rumors. Like, I would shake my head a little there.
Higher performance and faster and more reliable. Nothing else has been implemented in a way that nothing else will ever know.
I'm going to get us over to Seth Masket now in Denver. He is a political science expert at Denver University. He is also the author of the SMOTUS Report and many books about American politics, including the recently published Elephants in the Room, How Trump Voters Seized the Party from Republican Leaders. Seth, Colorado politics is everywhere today. How popular are you? Do you feel cool right now?
This is very exciting. This is my busy season. Just sort of enjoying the moment. Once Colorado's usually not at the forefront of the national political discussion, but once in a while we have our day in the sun. So try to make the most of that.
That's right. You probably were there for the tail end of it. Like the kind of Cory Gardner era was maybe the last of Colorado being a key scrutinized sort of tipping point state. It does not feel like that kind of state anymore, but there are some very exciting things happening in Democratic politics. Am I kind of reading that square?
Yeah, I mean, I moved here in 2004, and back then this was a swing state in presidential elections. The control of the state legislature jumped back and forth, but over the last decade, it's become a pretty solidly blue state. General elections aren't usually that interesting, but what goes on within the parties is pretty fascinating right now, both Democratic and Republican primaries.
Right. And sort of the eye of the national political media is on Colorado. And there's two races I think your audience is very tuned into, and our audience at Eventual is really starting to iris down on. And of course, that is Congresswoman Diana DeGette, sort of longtime powerful legislator in the Denver area. And she's facing a very, very challenging primary from Milat Kuros. And then we've got Senator Michael Bennet, who is running for governor, trying to come home. And things are looking, I would say, quizzical to sort of negative for Senator Bennet. So my thought here, and Seth, maybe you can tell me if this is a mistake, I almost want to handle these races like at the same time. And I know that's sort of a challenging thing to do. But I'm like, do you think that the voters, like, are the voters sort of singular in their mind about how they're thinking about these two races? Or do you think that they're just all over the place and how they're processing data and candidates and, where they are with regard to the president? Like, what is like the psychology of the voter right now? Maybe we can start there and kind of get to the forecasts and whether or not they're smart or sort of silly.
Yeah, I mean, it's, for Democratic voters going into the primary, there's obviously some overlap there, at least for voters in the first congressional district. There's 8 districts in Colorado. But in the first district, which is basically the city of Denver, you have both Diana DeGette and Michael Bennet on the same ballot. They're both longstanding incumbents here. They're both considered like reliable Democrats, and they haven't really been involved in particular scandals or anything like that. But for people, voters kind of on the left, voters who are kind of really very interested in progressive challenges to the status quo, who are very annoyed with the Democratic Party nationally, who might lean toward Democratic Socialist candidates or something like that, they're looking at this through a similar lens, right? They're both saying, whatever the status quo is, whatever the establishment is, just is not working for me, and I want something different. Now, there's obviously some big differences between their challengers. Milat Kuros in the first district, she's actually a DSA member. She's pretty well to the left. Whereas Michael Bennett's challenger is Phil Weiser, the state's current attorney general. He and Weiser, they're both very much standard center-left Democrats. There's not really like a huge ideological gap between them. But it's much more of an anti-establishment vibe that seems to be driving these races.
Great. And so I'll sort of remand it to the experts for a second there, just to sort of stage set. But Elena Schneider at Noticed writes, quote, "What's next for Democratic Socialists? It could be Denver." And this is about how Melat Kuros, a young DSA candidate, looks to be overtaking Diana DeGette. And then, as you said, I'll quote the great Jesse Paul of the Colorado Sun. Phil Weiser leads Michael Bennet in a new poll with Colorado's Democratic primary for government coming down to undecided voters. So, about all of that you just said. So, when I look at, the forecasts on Polymarket, for example, are giving about 20% odds that Michael Bennet can win this primary, and slightly similar odds that Diana DeGette can hold her own seat. So that's not particularly optimistic. But what I see when I look at polls is there really aren't a lot. So there were a lot of headlines that were written about Michael Bennet looking bad or looking weak in the most recent poll that he had head-to-head with Phil Weiser. But it's very hard to find data. And I sort of wonder, how much value do you put on sort of lightly polled races late in the game? Should this be a flashing red light, or should this be like a shrug to people who are trying to figure out what's going on?
The lack of really reliable polling is, I don't know, I find it kind of bothersome. This used to be a much more polling rich state, and I think it's just sort of a general national trend. It's generally newspapers that finance a lot of these polls. There's just fewer newspapers. Those newspapers that still exist have less money to do this sort of thing. A lot of these campaigns have internal polls.
Yeah.
And sometimes they'll release them, sometimes they won't. So if you're paying attention within the political system, you'll hear rumors, which is not a really reliable way to make predictions about things. But there's people.
It's worth something though. I mean, it makes the wheel spin.
Yeah. And so and that's just sort of generally an impression I've heard, that this, a few months ago, this was considered, and the governor's race was considered very safe for Michael Bennet. He had a huge name recognition advantage. That has eroded over time as the campaigns have gone on. And now, most insiders I talk to are saying that Weiser has an advantage going in, but, there's a lot of undecided voters. This is a state with a lot of unaffiliated voters who can participate in primary elections. And it's hard to know how they're going to vote or whether they will in fact vote. We won't, know that until tomorrow night.
Nothing else people have ever known.
Hey guys, important reminder, this show is not financial advice. Let me restate that. This is not financial advice. The people who are coming on these shows may be trading, they may be holding positions in the markets they discuss, and they could change them or close them or sell them without ever saying so. So if you want to trade in prediction markets, come to us for information. This is not an endorsement of any trade. So be safe out there, do your own research, trade safe. Thank you. So there's an art and a science to that, though. So if I look at undecided voters, it looks like it's almost 3-1 that they're casting ballots for Democrats. Mm-hmm. And that's not really a given in Colorado. So my question is, there's the wannabe Nate Silver types that try and impute a lesson for that. Well, there's a certain type of motivated voter that's not usually motivated to vote for Democrats, and what's motivating them. And I guess my question to you would be does that mean anything to you if undecideds are so much more likely to be voting for Democrats this cycle? Does that tell you about the psychology of the independent voter in Colorado? Or is that again, just kind of we can talk about it after Election Day, but it's just conjecture at this point?
Well, we've seen some polling in previous cycles suggesting that a lot of the unaffiliated voters in Colorado just generally vote Democratic anyway. And so they lean somewhat in that direction. They just prefer not to call themselves registered members of the party. But that, even setting that aside, I think there's also recognition that Colorado is a reliably blue state. There are a lot of contests in Democratic primaries this year, statewide and in congressional and state legislative districts, more than you're seeing on the Republican side. But also, it's almost in all the statewide races, it's almost invariably the Democrat that's going to win. Right. So generally, if people have a choice which race they want to weigh into, they probably want to weigh in on the one that's actually has a shot at governing.
Yeah. So it's sort of an admission of reality. You're not taking that as the ideology of the voter is reflected in this data. You're just sort of taking it as, well, the voter knows the Democrat's probably going to choose the direction of the state, so they might as well just cast a ballot there. Right. What do you make the early reporting? I used to be a journalist. This is still a journalistic endeavor. So I understand there's like a need to kind of create hype. But the early reporting has suggested that turnout is down. And like, again, this is a narrative that people like to start hanging things on. Well, if turnout's down and the youth vote seems sort of small, then, maybe all the hype around Melat Kuros and the sort of DSA Mamdani movement coming to Colorado, like maybe it's hype, maybe it's not real. And again, like I feel like I'm just giving you like the straight, like true or false, tell me. But like, does that mean anything, or is this just national media hype, like looking for something to write about in Colorado when at the end of the day, maybe the incumbents look better than the odds suggest?
So the most recent numbers I've looked at, and this is, there's a little bit of tea leaf reading here in Colorado, but we have this mail-in ballot. Voters got their ballots 3 weeks ago. And these ballots start trickling in. Some people, it's like getting a bill. Some people pay it right away. Some people wait until the deadline. So we've seen this steady trickle. Just in the last couple of days, it looks like the number of ballots returned by this point has gotten a little bit higher than it was like 4 years ago. Yeah. I think that the turnout seems to be picking up. It might be a situation where we'll get a lot more very close to the election or even on election day than we have in the past, simply because most of these races didn't look that competitive until fairly recently. But otherwise, it's hard to say. I don't think we're looking at a particularly low turnout race. It's looking pretty competitive for a midterm election, as far as I can tell.
Yeah. But like, what is the rabid Diana DeGette voter? So like no, but like, what is it? Like
that's a contradiction in terms. But go on. Yeah.
Yeah, but like the way that like this specific primary in Colorado 1 has been set up is that Diana DeGette is this embattled veteran, and she's calling in airstrike after airstrike of DCCC money and National Party money to try and hold on to this seat. And then you have it's this story we've seen over and over again. Then we have Melat Kuros on the other side, who's got Hassan Piker coming in and has the sort of proto Mamdani machine starting to turn for her. And it's very easy to say like, okay, so we know what like Melat Kuros's victory looks like, but it's like very hard to visualize who the like core of people that are going to turn out in a primary, non-presidential cycle for Diana DeGette are. So what is that? What is that? Or is this race already over?
So DeGette, remember, she's been in Congress 30 years now. Yes. She first won that seat in 96. And she has actually survived a few scrapes in primary elections in the past. Some stuff that it looks like she's got some activist base rising up against her. And she usually dispatches them pretty handily in the primary. And part of that is just, the advantages that incumbents have in a primary race. Like, most primary voters don't know a lot about the candidates that are running. Maybe they're paying attention to the governor's race or a Senate race or something like that. And they'll just recognize Diana DeGette. They'll just recognize that the incumbent is in the race. They don't associate with her with any particular scandals or crises or anything like that. She just has a reputation as a reliably Democratic vote. So I don't think there's a whole lot of people that are passionately pro DeGette in the district, but she has generally been able to draw on, just a lot of the advantages that incumbents have. She's been seen as reliable, and, there's not been too many situations where people just want to throw out an incumbent. And I think, people within Denver think on it a little more, just realize, well, someone who's been in Congress 30 years is going to have some clout there that a first termer won't. And that's probably to the benefit of the district. And so unless there's something egregious, they usually don't throw out an incumbent. This year, I think, is a little different. It's looking more like the Tea Party year of 2010, where just like being an incumbent is a dangerous position to be in. So I think that just puts her more in danger now.
Is that just it? Is that it, that you go to Costco or something like that, and people are just assessing candidates solely on, how virulently they can resist Trump? And like, is that the sole, guiding metric. Like people have, they've tried to make it about, socialism versus center left Democrat versus Boa. And like, my suspicion is it looks, just squinting at the map, like that's a pretty highly educated, like reasonable, rational electorate. Like that the sole question might just be Trump and it might not be anything else.
That I think that that's very true to a large extent. There's if you look at polling on both sides, Democratic and Republican voters, and ask them like, what's the most important issue facing the country? What's the most important issue facing Colorado? They'll pretty much always say Donald Trump. And it's, Democrats want people who will fight back more, and Republicans want people who will protect Trump more. But it's just that that's very much at the top of their minds. And he, of course, as we've seen over the last 10 years, he's very skilled at making every conversation about himself. So that's driving a lot. A lot of Democrats are very, annoyed with their own party's leadership as they perceive it. They see that it should be more strident, basically, not necessarily even more left, but just, as they see it, working harder to slow Trump down or to push back against him. And they don't get a lot of sense that their incumbents are doing that, whether that's factual enough. So, I don't think it's that much an ideological vote decision. It's not that much based on policy. It's more, I hate to use the word vibes, but there's a lot of that driving it. Just basically, are you standing up to what is going on in the country right now strong enough? And, that's, I think, a big reason Democrats are looking for a lot of alternatives right now.
But the vibe isn't like, sometimes when you really look at insurgent campaigns, like sometimes the vibe is that they're like totally fake and they're not real. And I don't get the sense that that's the vibe here. Like I get the sense that these are well-organized campaigns, whether it's Melat Kuros kind of on the left end of the spectrum or Phil Weiser kind of in the center of the spectrum. Like these are two very well-organized campaigns that know what they're doing. Or am I making that up? Like, are these fake campaigns?
No, I think that's accurate. I mean, I think these are bright candidates. They are well-funded. They have strong campaigns. They've run very well. But I think they are also in Weiser and Kuros, they are benefiting from this anti-establishment tide that's going on in the Democratic side right now. And I think if these campaigns were being run in 2022 or 2014 or something like that, I don't think they would be nearly as successful as they are this year.
Yeah. Well, so just like bluntly asking, the markets are very, very strongly of the opinion that Michael Bennet and Diana DeGette will not survive their primaries on Tuesday. 75 again, like the opinion is 75 to 80% chance that these are not successful incumbents and that we see kind of new faces coming into these races on the Democratic side. Are you sort of like long or short at that level of probability? I mean, do you think that's fair, or do you think that that's a miss?
I think they may be understating support for both Bennett and DeGette. I mean, I don't have much more to go on other than just lots of conversations with people. But something that often gets missed in the DeGette Kuros race is that there is a third candidate in that race, Wanda James, who is currently a regent for the University of Colorado. She's a candidate. She has not been as successful a fundraiser. She's not been as big a presence in that contest. But the fact that you have an incumbent, Diana DeGette, running not against one challenger, but two, means that the anti-establishment vote may be kind of split. Kuros will get the bulk of that vote, but it's possible that DeGette wins just because her opposition is split.
Do people know that the third candidate exists, or is this, again, like, is this a paper tiger?
I mean, she's on the ballot. She's appeared in a number of debates, but she has not gotten a lot of media attention of late. I don't see. So people who put their money into prediction markets. I don't know how much they're paying attention to that side of it, but I think that's an important complicating factor that you don't see in the governor's race. Yeah,
we've got all kinds of election nerds here, so I'm sure some of them are trying to pencil out that very question right now. But I mean, I do I look at Michael Bennet as a longtime incumbent. He seems well liked. I watched the debate. I mean, it was like these two guys trying to figure out how to contrast with each other was hilarious. It was like two guys at the same fraternity trying to tell, their dates that they weren't, the same dudes. I mean, I do think like, wow, 25% chance that Michael Bennet gets through the primary seems a little bit understated off of what, like one poll and some rumors. Like, I would shake my head a little there.
Yeah, I think it's understating Bennett's chances. And I also think, I mean, you make a good point that like there is very little ideological or policy difference between these two candidates. You have to work really hard to find it. They're both cut of very similar cloth. They're these center-left mainstream Democrats. Weiser gets some credit for being more of an outsider, simply because he's not a U.S. senator right now. So that I think that's whatever advantage he has, that is giving it to him. But it's interesting when you talk to people involved in politics or talk to Democratic voters about this contest, people have opinions. Like some people just like Weiser, or some people just like Bennett better, but they'll also say, but if the other guy wins, that's fine too. I really don't get, like, it's, the cost of getting this one wrong is really low. You're going to get, either way, the Democrat is going to win this race in November. And either way, you're going to get a similar range of policy outcomes in the state.
You get a whiteboard if you get Weiser, though. I've noticed he's a big whiteboard guy.
There will be whiteboard, yes.
Yeah. Rapidly pro whiteboard. That's the Colorado electorate if Phil Weiser gets through this primary. Well, can I ask you a political scientist question? Can I ask you like a big question that probably gets into like the book that you just published? So I'm watching the sort of DSA, Democratic Socialists of America, kind of snowballing, creating energy. And I'm wondering if this sort of new direction of the Democratic Party, does it mean that like on some level, the MAGA movement won the argument that America has a class problem versus like a race problem? I felt like this was an open question in 2020, 2021 was, first Trump presidency, but does the DSA say that, like Democrats are now on the same page as MAGA, that there's sort of like a class issue in America? And that's going to be the story we're telling for the next couple of years?
That's an interesting way of framing it. And I hadn't thought of it in those terms. I don't think, I still think racial politics are still very much a live wire within the Democratic Party. And yes, a lot of what you're hearing now is more on the economic side of things. I don't know that MAGA necessarily won the argument, but something that we've seen over several decades now is just kind of a rising populist streak within both parties. And this is not unique to the United States. We've seen sort of like populist rises in a lot of democracies in Europe as well. This has really transformed the Republican Party. And that's a big part of what I wrote the book about, like how the party transformed into a place that it would find someone like Donald Trump acceptable as a presidential candidate. And that he would recognize them as a home. This has been going on to a lesser extent so far, but still there on the Democratic side. And we saw inklings of that with Occupy Wall Street a decade ago. We saw inklings of that with Bernie Sanders run for president in 2016. The 2018 midterm primaries were kind of fascinating, where there were a lot of progressive challenges to Democratic incumbents. Along these lines, most of those fizzled out, but that also produced AOC, that produced the Squad,
right? And
I think we're seeing a bigger presence for that this year. There's a lot of things going on that are fueling that populist rise, which just a lot of the rhetoric is much more focused on class. It's much more focused on inequality and economic stagnation than it is on race. But I don't think that means that like race is out of the picture.
Right. Well, you certainly set up a really interesting test for this election. Like, 18 felt very much like the year of Lizzie Fletcher, the year of Kyrsten Sinema, the year of Colin Allred. And I suppose 26, if there's as big of a Democratic wave as the data suggests there will be, might yet be the year of the sort of centrist Dem. But right now it feels like the year of something new. And I think your election on Tuesday in Colorado is going to be a really interesting test case of how true that is. And the market, I will say, has a very clear opinion about where this will land, and we will have fun between now and then figuring out if it's right.
I agree. We're going to learn a lot tomorrow night, so I'm looking forward to that.
Seth, where can people find your work? Remind the Eventual crew where they can find you.
So I'm doing a lot of work here these days on Substack. My Substack newsletter is called the SMOTUS Report at smotus.substack.com. That's SMOTUS, Seth Masket of the United States. I'm also on Blue Sky under the same SMOTUS name. And be sure to check out my book. It's available. It's on the market now. The Elephant's in the Room. You can find it at most major booksellers.
All right, Seth, thanks for joining.
All right. Thanks so much for having me on.
And that's our show. Thanks for watching. This episode of Eventual was produced by Alex Asdorian with help from Matt Talese. I'm Alex Keeney, your host and founder. Please visit Eventual and subscribe wherever you get your shows, whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple. We have much more news and analysis of